Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to those of you who are watching us live and to those of you who are watching back on the recorded version. I also want to say hello to our speakers who've given up their time today to share their expertise in this discussion that we're going to have. My name is Fiona Furacao. I am the Program Director for the Southeast Europe and Black Sea program here at the Platform for Peace and Humanity. For those of you who aren't aware, this webinar today is by the Platform for Peace and Humanity, and we are an international civic association who promote and advocate for humanitarian values through international law, research-driven monitoring, consultancy, and specialist expertise. We ran a webinar on this topic about a year ago in October 2023. If you've missed that, you can catch up on our YouTube or on our website. In that webinar, we were looking at the 2023 hostilities in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, looking at the humanitarian crisis and the human rights violations. We looked a lot at the historical background and root causes of this conflict. There was a discussion around questions of self-determination and sovereignty over the contested land, as well as looking at the prospective role of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, and potential avenues for peaceful resolution. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in hearing more about, I encourage you to go and check out the recording of our previous webinar. Today, we're hoping to continue on the discussion that we had in that webinar a year ago. Oh, wonderful, we've got Artsakh with us as well. Welcome, Artsakh. So this event today, we're looking to explore the situation of Nagorno-Karabakh refugees in Armenia about a year after the 2023 offensive. We'll be looking at challenges, prospects, opportunities for all parties involved, and we'll be assessing the response of the international community as well. So I just wanted to say that even though September of 2023 is when we saw Azerbaijan's large-scale military offensive against the breakaway state of Artsakh, and nearly the entire population of the region, about 100,000 people, were forced to flee to Armenia. We have seen this region in the headlines a lot in 2024, and I think it's important that we have this webinar and that we keep discussing the region in 2024. So in January of 2024, we saw the dissolution of all state institutions in the region, bringing the existence of the breakaway state to an end, essentially. In April of 2024, Armenia's case against Azerbaijan was heard at the International Court of Justice. So that case, which was filed in 2021, was heard this year, and it accuses Azerbaijan of ethnic cleansing in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And just today, December the 19th, the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling for the immediate release of the former leaders of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh who are currently being held in prison in Baku. So to reflect on all that has happened this year and maybe to look forward at 2025 and what that might mean for the region and for the refugees, we have three expert speakers with us. I think only two of them are here so far, but hopefully we will have three expert speakers with us throughout the course of this webinar. So our first speaker will be Shoshannah Isahaikian, who is an advocate specialized in human rights and administrative law. She works as a lawyer across several firms in Armenia, and she'll be speaking with us today about the work that she's been doing since September 2023, and looking particularly at the applications to European Court of Human Rights against Azerbaijan and the Armenian government's relation to interstate applications, including their possible intention to withdraw the interstate application that was submitted after the 44-day war. Our second speaker will be Sasi Taktikian, who is currently a PhD researcher at the Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Her main research topics are ethnic conflicts, cognitive warfare and lawfare, Euro-Atlantic integration, security dilemmas of small states and de facto states. She's formerly a diplomat representing Armenia and now acts as an independent analyst on foreign and security policies. She's involved in informal public diplomacy and peace building. And today she'll be with us to speak about the legal and political aspects of ethnic cleansing and/or forced displacement of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. And our final speaker today will be Artsakh, the chairman of the Artsakh Union Community NGO. For more than 2 years, he served as the Human Rights Ombudsman of Artsakh, and during his tenure, the Office of the Ombudsman issued numerous reports on both domestic and conflict-related human rights violations, including on war crimes committed by Azerbaijan during the 2020 aggression against Artsakh. Today, he'll be with us speaking about the exacerbating conditions blocking the return of the genocide-affected people of Nagorno-Karabakh to their homeland. So thanks to all three of you for joining us today. I'm really interested to see the kind of discussion that we will have. And as I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who are here, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions now or as our speakers are giving their discussion points, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll get to those questions at the end of our speaking time. Thank you so much. All right, Shushanik, over to you.
Hello everyone, thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm Shushanik Isahakian, advocate working in Vanadzor, Armenia. I work in Tumanyan Law Office. It's a private office, but since 2020, we've applied many applications to the European Court of Human Rights regarding population of Nagorno-Karabakh. After September 2023, we initiated applications against Azerbaijan to the ECHR about violations of rights of the population of Nagorno-Karabakh. Our main partner was Helsinki Citizens Assembly Vanadzor, and there were also some other organizations and private advocates working on these cases. In our applications to the ECHR, we highlighted several human rights violations during the blockade and as a result of the forced displacement. First of all, we mentioned the right to prohibition of torture, as during the blockade, people were subject to inhumane conditions and were deprived from access to essential supplies, food, and medical care. The second right we highlighted was freedom of movement, as the population of Artsakh was restricted to leave Artsakh or to enter the region freely. This right also led to the violation of right of private and family life, as there were many families that some members of the family were in Artsakh, as others were outside Artsakh, especially in Armenia. Maybe the most famous case also in media was the case of our other speaker, Artsakh Beglaryan, whose family also was a part during these months. The next right that we highlighted was prohibition of discrimination, as in the during the blockade and also during the forced displacement, because it was obvious that these violations of rights were because of ethnicity, Armenian ethnicity of people living in Artsakh. After September 2023, all these people were deprived from their property. So we mentioned right to property, Also, we included right to collective expulsion, because so it was some try to violation of this right, because there are not many cases in European courts practice of this right. Additionally, we had one case involving connected to the case of fuel depot explosion, because in this case many people were missing, and the only state that has effective control over Nagorno-Karabakh during these days was Azerbaijan, and they never made investigation to find out the why that explosion occurred, and they made no investigation to find missing people after this explosion. So we mentioned also the rights of family members of these people who never had the opportunity even to bury their family members. We had 23 applications after September 2023, and our partner, Helsinki Citizens Assembly Manager, submitted about 80 applications. I don't know the exact number of applications submitted by other organizations or advocates. In this case, Armenian government didn't manage or didn't want to organize work that was done by civil society or private advocates. It was not the case in 2020. At that time, Armenian government collected information from us, and they used this information in their interstate application. So people didn't have to submit individual applications to the European Court, as they knew that government makes efforts to protect their rights or to have applications on their behalf. In this case, as there were not many advocates working, I think that only few families had opportunity to submit applications. We tried to see it in the 4-month period of ECHR submitting applications, but I know that there are still some NGOs and advocates trying to collect documents and submit applications on behalf of some families. But I'm not sure that they will manage to overcome this 4-month period of applications deadline. So these government's ignorance to this process had a huge bad impact on these processes. And now, as the processes are going with Azerbaijan on the contract, like there are some people and some media telling that Armenian government wants to withdraw with applications to the international courts against Azerbaijan. And we have concern that if this happens also to the interstate application against Azerbaijan in ECHR, people who didn't submit individual applications in 2020 will not have any opportunity to do it again now. So I think it's now it's very important to have some conversations and work with government to definitely know if they are going to do it or not. And if yes, how these people can pursue and demand that their applications are submitted now and be admitted by European Court. I think that that's all I have to say for now, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Zuzhanik. That was so interesting. It's really interesting to hear the work that you've been doing over the past year and a bit, and your potential concerns for what could happen as well. If anyone listening does have questions, Zuzhanik, please leave them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of this webinar. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we can move on to our second speaker here today, who is, as I explained at the beginning of the webinar, Sosi Tatikian. So Sosi, if you are ready to get started, I'm so glad you were able to join.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. And I think it's very important that Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh issue shouldn't be forgotten, and we should continue to address its different aspects, and not only as an academic matter, but also an ongoing advocacy and political and legal issue. Since Zuzhanik covered human rights aspects mostly, I will more focus on political aspects. I've written many articles about Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and the last two, recently it was a policy version and academic version, legal and political aspects, but I'm not a lawyer, although I know international legal aspects sufficiently, so I will address political and international legal aspects. I will start from the origin of the conflict, and of course it's not the origin, because origin we can go back to the 1920s, but I will just go back to 1988 just to remember how the conflict started and compare it with another conflict, which is a Kosovo conflict. So two conflicts started in a very similar manner. Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region and Kosovans in former Yugoslavia were marginalized, suppressed. There were all kinds of policy actions by respective governments to oppress them, including their cultural and social rights. And in both cases, their autonomous status was abolished. In fact, in case of Nagorno-Karabakh, it was worse because Azerbaijan, Soviet Azerbaijan, simply abolished the autonomous status of Nagorno-Karabakh, while in case of former Yugoslavia, Milosevic only reduced the level of the autonomy of Kosovo. And that's when, in both cases, self-determination, a national liberation movement started. And in case of Nagorno-Karabakh, it was a peaceful movement. And then in both cases, it turned into an armed conflict because the metropole state didn't accept the self-determination movement and started intervening with security forces, armed forces, and then it turned into an armed conflict. And of course, there is no any black and white conflict in the world. So in any conflict in Balkans, in Africa, in post-Soviet space, every conflict has some accountability issues on both sides. But what happened in case of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is that there was no any international intervention, unlike the case of Kosovo, where international community had an interest it was considered in the European space and geopolitically important. So the West intervened, led by the US, and there was a NATO intervention, and then a whole peacekeeping architecture was established there after the NATO intervention. And that's exactly when Kosovo was turned into a kind of international protectorate, and the West invested a lot in order to find a consensus between Serbia and Kosovo. And after it was not found, then there was a unilateral recognition of Kosovo as such. Returning to Nagorno-Karabakh, it didn't happen. Why it didn't happen? Perhaps it was too far away, too remote. The West didn't have a geopolitical interest. Moreover, there was a Russian presence, and it was considered the zone of the Russian influence, and Russia was basically interested in having a conflict in order to keep its presence. So the negotiations throughout 27 years didn't result in a solution. Here we should take into account that when the Armenian side conducted a military victory in 93, it was Armenian side, I mean both like Nagorno-Karabakh and supported by Armenia as a sovereign state. They were controlling not only Nagorno-Karabakh, but also the surrounding regions of Azerbaijan. And we should also distinguish between those regions, because it's 5+2. Two of them, Kelbajar and Lachin, were very strategically important, because without them, Nagorno-Karabakh was turning into an enclave, and which was not sustainable neither economically nor security-wise. But then the other 5 regions were a different story. And because the negotiations weren't going anywhere throughout 27 years, and why? Because Azerbaijan was not interested in a peaceful solution, because it started exploiting oil and gas pipelines in 2005 and started investing the profits in the military industry and preparing basically for the war with very maximalist ambitions. And the Armenian side, starting at least the second president of Armenia, was thinking that the status quo may be favorable, and it was having this lazy diplomacy and not even investing in its defense sector, thinking that, and very much relying on Russia, very naively. So then, and the mediators were quite soft, not as robust as in case of Kosovo. And basically after 27 years, there was no any solution. And any plan which was suggested for Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, every new plan was less and less favorable for the Armenian side and more favorable for Azerbaijani side. And if in the beginning, like in 97, there was a solution quite similar to the one in Kosovo, which was international peacekeepers. Then towards the end, it was Russian peacekeepers that were featuring in any plan. And then during COVID and elections in the US, Azerbaijan found the very favorable moment to start a war when the attention of international community was focused on COVID and on the US elections, and conducted a military victory, and it took back those surrounding territories. But moreover, it also occupied 1/3 of Nagorno-Karabakh itself, including Hadrut region, which was traditionally always Armenian populated, and also Shushi, which was a historically multi-ethnic city, and part of Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. And many in the international community thought that the conflict is over. Okay, Russia negotiated a ceasefire declaration, which was very favorable for Azerbaijan and very unfavorable for Armenia. However, the conflict wasn't over. The Russian so-called peacekeepers with no international mandate were deployed, and there was a relative peace only for a few months. After a few months, Russian peacekeepers, most likely in coordination and even instructed by Azerbaijan, first started blocking the access of international journalists and NGOs to Nagorno-Karabakh Oblast. Nagorno-Karabakh, sorry, I was wrong. So Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. Then they started ignoring violations of ceasefire by Azerbaijan, who would be shooting even on agricultural workers who were trying to harvest harvest basically close to the contact line. Then they started creating problems for diaspora Armenians going to Artsakh. And then there were several civilians killed during this relatively peaceful period, doing just like construction work or something like that. And then the war in Ukraine started, and this is exactly when this was a turning point, and Azerbaijan took full advantage of the war in Ukraine in more ways than it's comprehended by many, because not only that it signed a declaration on strategic partnership, almost like alliance with Russia, just 2 days before the war in Ukraine started, and started improving a very strategic partnership with Russia that is continuing until now. But also it started cutting the gas and electricity just like 5 days after the war in Ukraine started. And it was freezing cold. And of course, Artsakh knows it better than any of us because he was there. It was freezing temperature beginning end of February and March. So it started weaponizing energy. So this is exactly when the hybrid war starts using contemporary methods of warfare. And then it intensified violations of ceasefire and started military advances, further military advances, and Russian peacekeepers did absolutely nothing to prevent it. And finally, and it also intensified the war of narratives, because with the war in Ukraine, a self-determination principle was really shadowed, and the principle of territorial integrity was kind of absolutized. It became an absolute principle in international law. And Azerbaijan started creating, actually it didn't start, but it intensified because it was doing it even before, artificial parallels between the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh and that in Donbass and Crimea and Abkhazia and South Ossetia, while if we go very deep, we will realize how different are those conflicts, because again, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is much more similar to the one in Kosovo. Then finally, Azerbaijan started the blockade. And the blockade, when it started in December 2022, it was partial. Before the blockade, it basically took over the original Lachin corridor, which was a humanitarian corridor, ensuring the link with Armenia and with the world. And then the new corridor was much more insecure, and then it was first partial, but it wasn't at state level. They used eco-activists who were pseudo-activists. It was fully state-sponsored youth who blocked the corridor, and they continued it until between December and April, until Azerbaijani security services replaced them, and they disappeared overnight, as it was expected. And during this entire time, international community, and by that meaning mostly European Union and US, were trying to do some kind of mediation. Azerbaijan was blocking any international mediation effort, with some exception of the Russian mediation, and it never accepted the idea of international peacekeeping presence. And of course, it would use Russia to veto any international peacekeeping presence. It would not agree even on international humanitarian, very, very small civil protection presence. And it rejected any idea of giving any self-governance status to Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. So it was insisting that it's a unitary state, and it is capable to ensure human rights and security of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is, of course, it's very strange to believe, because Azerbaijan is becoming increasingly totalitarian state. It's not even just an authoritarian state, but it's a state repressive to its own citizens, and it had conducted at least 2 decades of propaganda of ethnic hatred to Armenians, using the worst possible labels, stigmatizing Armenians. And of course, it was very naive to believe that Azerbaijan would be able to ensure human rights and security without any international presence. And then the blockade became increasingly full, and at the end of June, and Azerbaijan prohibited first Russian so-called peacekeepers to deliver humanitarian convoys, and then it prohibited ICRC with a totally fabricated accusation. They found an ICRC driver smuggling cigarettes and some iPhone or something like that. And they, until now, they claimed that ICRC was smuggling mines and weapons or whatever, which is, of course, a complete disinformation. And during this whole period, Azerbaijan was completely denying that there is any blockade whatsoever. It was a total, and until now they are denying it. And then finally, when the population literally started starving, and their perseverance started breaking, they launched a military offensive, 24 hours, during which 235, I think, people were killed, including civilians. They claim also that this was anti-terror offensive. This is identical to the language that Mladic used in relation to Srebrenica at the time. I've compared the decrees. It's completely the same language, anti-terror, and even the methods like convincing so-called peacekeepers not to prevent the military offensive and disarming the local defense force. It was identical, and then convincing the population that you are safe, nothing is going to happen to you. At the same time, there were those lists circulating and rumors that they may detain, they may conduct mass detention of many people, especially men, because, you know, Nagorno-Karabakh local defense force was a civil force. It wasn't a professional force. It meant that basically almost every man had served there as a conscript. So there were lists of hundreds of thousands of people, and even a rumor that they are constructing a huge prison in Agdam. So this was also a cognitive warfare. So Azerbaijan combined tactics of hybrid war, including weaponization of energy, weaponization of humanitarian assistance, hunger, and also cognitive warfare, trying to intimidate, psychologically affect, influence the population, and intensify their worst fears. Also, they started arbitrary detentions of people who were trying to evacuate to Armenia for medical or whatsoever reasons. And finally, there was this explosion of depot, which caused another 200 plus victims and a lot of injured people. So this was a complete nightmare where basically the only tool that Azerbaijan didn't use was massacres. And of course, Azerbaijan wouldn't use massacres because, at least in that sense, it was under monitoring by the West, European Union and US, that had made some red lines clear. And because it's 2024 and it didn't even need to do so, because after all the starvation, after all months of blockade, people had lost their resilience, and they were just afraid that Azerbaijan will restart the blockade that was removed after military offensive, and they would not be able even to get out of there. And so mass exodus happened. It took several days for more than 100,000 people to move to Armenia. And then, of course, the denial intensified. And until now, Azerbaijan denies the blockade. And it denies ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, and it claims that people left voluntarily, and then they had offered integration. Integration is a very, Azerbaijan had planned all of this very strategically. This was obvious that every step was very strategic and based on also lawfare, as I already talked about, and all of this was also supposed to whitewash and legitimize actions that it had taken. So denial continues. Azerbaijan is now demanding Armenia to withdraw its cases from ICJ and ECHR, which as a precondition for a peace agreement. As we know, in November, there was another hearing in ICJ, and Armenia conducted, I would say, a real victory, because Azerbaijani mirroring case was almost dismissed by ICJ. There is very little that is left from that case, because it was so badly legally justified, while Armenian case is valid, and Armenia obviously has a lot of chance to win that case. And I very much hope that Armenia will not withdraw this case, because Azerbaijan has very serious objectives. It's not satisfied with the de facto elimination of Nagorno-Karabakh, but it has raised mirroring fabricated claims, such as Western Azerbaijan notion, claiming that there were Azerbaijanis that lived in Armenia before the First Karabakh War have been also ethnically cleansed. And of course, it's not true, because there were no any massacres in Armenia, unlike Azerbaijan, where there were mass massacres in Sumgait, Baku, and in Nagorno-Karabakh territory. While during the First Karabakh War, Azerbaijanis actually received compensation for their apartments, and so it was considered rather population exchange. However, it seems that it's not only a mirroring case, because some people think that Azerbaijan is raising this claim only in order to prevent, to close the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. But I don't believe so. I personally think that Azerbaijan simply has expansionist ambitions because of favorable situation in political military balance, and because it thinks that it can launch other military offensives towards Armenia, as it did in 2021 and 2022. It is now occupying more than 250 square kilometers of sovereign Armenian territories in several border regions, and it believes that if there is a favorable geopolitical, global, or regional situation, it can take further its military offensives and occupy more of sovereign Armenia's territory. And it has different preconditions. It was demanding a so-called Zangezur corridor, which is extraterritorial corridor through the territory of Armenia, to be controlled by Russian FSB, together with Russia and Turkey, although Turkey has toned down that demand recently. So it's a very complex political situation, and denial also shows its very strategically planned nature of all actions of Azerbaijan. And I have a personal opinion that I haven't heard anybody else to articulate except one, but I want to emphasize it, that to my opinion, Azerbaijan's President Aliyev is so strategic that it strategically conducted this military offensive in September 2023 in order not to be accused in genocide. Why do I say so? Because if the situation, the full total blockade in Nagorno-Karabakh continued few weeks, and I would very much like Artsakh, Mr. Beglarian, I would very much like to hear from him whether he agrees with me. People would start literally dying in masses. As Louis Ocampo had elaborated in his reports and articles between July and September, it was turning into a genocide, starvation genocide, as something that has been used in other conflicts, the same Srebrenica, the same Holodomor in Ukraine, during Armenian genocide by Ottoman Empire, and some other conflicts. And in that sense, it realized that it was going to be accused in a genocide, and it decided to do this yet another legally manipulative operation, calling it anti-terror operation, claiming that it's only aimed at abolishing the local defense force. And it also turned it into yet another tool of propaganda and legal warfare. So this will conclude what I was planning to speak about today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sosi. We appreciate your thoughts. As someone who has lived in Kosovo, I think the parallels between Kosovo and this conflict are so interesting to think about, as well as how the community has responded to both conflicts. So as you said, we're moving on to Artsakh, who can share his experience and the work that he's doing as well.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you for inviting me and organizing this event, and thanks to Sosi and Chushanik for their great contributions. Actually, firstly, I will comment to Sosi's personal opinion. I think, yes, you're right. But I think the most important thing for Aliyev was just to prevent any possible even subjugation, even integration, etc., because he saw that after 2-3 months of using the so-called alternative route in order to jeopardize the genocidal intent or accusations, the Nagorno-Karabakh authorities had to agree the Red Cross transportation or supply of food and medicine through Azerbaijani territory. And just after that opening of the alternative route, upon the request or, I don't know, urges by the Western side, European Union, US, even by Russia, it was on September 18. And on September 19, Aliyev started the aggression. Why? Because he saw that again and again, the Nagorno-Karabakh side is not destructive side. And he can lose this opportunity, momentum, to push the people, force the people displace. Because his strategic goal, organizing the blockade and then starvation, partial blockade, then full blockade, and psychological terror continues, everything just had that intent to have a critical moment, and at that moment make an aggression, blitzkrieg, and then open latching corridor for forcing people out, and then saying that we didn't make anything. We were ready to integrate these people. It was against only terrorists, though there was no terrorists there. There were only defenders, and we didn't have any provocations against Azerbaijan. They were always provocating the situation in order to start aggression against us. And this was his plan. But again, I think partially the time was against Aliyev during that time already, because the genocidal intent or the accusations or of organizing genocide through starvation, they were increasing already. And it was the moment of our full exhaustion. It was the moment of the increasing accusations by the international community, and it was the moment of our new compromise to stop the Azerbaijani narrative of against the genocidal intent. Shortly, I will present also whatever I promised to present, then I would be ready to answer any questions if you have. I'm going to talk about our return and the obstacles and the reasons why we can't return now, and what kind of processes we have in the region and globally which are blocking our return. Our people want to return, and I would say that if there are strong international guarantees, and if Azerbaijani genocidal control is excluded, the overwhelming majority of our people are ready to return. Even just you can see that will in the behavior of our people, because only out of more than 120,000 people, over 6,000 persons so far applied for Armenian citizenship. Why? Because the majority thinks that if they apply for Armenian citizenship, there will be additional problems for their return and their rights to their property and many other rights to their homeland. What we have, firstly, the Azerbaijani control over Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, is the first obstacle for our return. But on the other hand, there is also geopolitical or political process or processes which are hindering our return. Armenian government doesn't want our return and considers our return as a threat against Armenian security, state national security, meaning that if we return, it will mean also the return of Azerbaijanis left Armenia in 1980s. But as Sosi described, they were not forcibly displaced. They just left, and there was mostly there was migration. But the Armenians from Azerbaijan were forcibly displaced in 1980s and 1990s. And Armenian government doesn't want to recognize the serious strategic differences between the Nagorno-Karabakh forcibly displaced people and Azerbaijanis who left Armenia in 1980s. As I said, the reasons are different. The Azerbaijanis who left Armenia, many of them sold their houses and then left Armenia, or exchanged their houses with Armenians, or got compensation by Armenia during 1990s. The Artsakh people was forcibly displaced, and there is no compensation. There is no possibility to return. Azerbaijan is using, without our consent, our homes and houses, and even they are destroying complete villages and residential areas. And besides, we had and we have had in Nagorno-Karabakh our independence. During Soviet time, we had our autonomous status, and we were recognized as people, as subject of international law. But Azerbaijanis living in Armenia, they were only national ethnic minorities, nothing else. And they didn't have any autonomous or independent or sovereign status. They were not recognized as a people, as a subject of international law. They were not indigenous living in their homeland. They were just people, their ancestors or they immigrated to Armenia and living there. And they were not living in a collectively in compact manner, unlike Nagorno-Karabakh people. But the Armenians who fled from Azerbaijan, they are similar to somewhat similar to the Azerbaijanis left Armenia. The only difference is the reason. The Armenians from Azerbaijan were displaced, forcibly displaced because of massacres, but Azerbaijanis from Armenia didn't see any kind of threat, any kind of massacres, any kind of killings, etc. And the second difference is the number. Azerbaijanis who left Armenia were over 170,000 based on Soviet census. The Armenians fled from Azerbaijan were more than 400,000 based on according to the Soviet census, but some scholars also calculate that Soviet Azerbaijani authorities hid the real number, which was more than 500,000. Even some scholars say 700,000, but at least 400,000 were officially recognized. Another thing, whatever we have, again, the Armenian government is against our return, and because of their position, they are not negotiating with Azerbaijan or pushing international community to solve this issue. But Armenia has that obligation also because of its international legal procedures and the complaints against Azerbaijan and the order of ICJ. Upon the request of Armenia on November 17 of 2023, after our forced displacement, the ICJ made a ruling among other orders. There was also an order that Azerbaijan should ensure our safe and dignified return to our homeland, but also the protection of our property, recognition of our documents, release of the detainees, the war prisoners, protection of the cultural heritage, etc. And Armenia is one of the parties of this complaint and ruling, and Armenia has legal obligation to do that. In addition to the national obligations inside Armenian domestic legal system. Besides, the other reason why we can't return is the continuous genocidal policy against our heritage there. Since 2020 and then since 2023, under their occupation, the Azerbaijani state with systemic manner is destroying our cultural heritage, mostly the cemeteries and the Christian heritage related to Armenians. Those churches which are very important for our identity either fully destroyed or were vandalized. Many cemeteries, fully or partially, were destroyed. Especially the monuments which are for our soldiers, for fallen soldiers, are fully destroyed. I mean, the soldiers who fought against Azerbaijan in 1990s and since then. But also the cross-stones or many other cultural monuments are under Azerbaijani destruction. And in Artsakh, we have more than 6,000 cultural monuments, many of them Christian monuments, more than 400 churches, and all of them are somewhat vandalized, destructed, destroyed, etc. By the way, mostly in territory of former Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region, not outside of that. Another reason is actually, I would say, the fundamental reason is continuous anti-Armenian ethnic hatred policy in Azerbaijan, which is number one ideological ground for all kinds of crimes against our people in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and in Armenia. And by now, this policy is continuous. And this policy is the ideological ground for genocidal intent of the Aliyev regime. And there are many statements by Aliyev showing that that genocidal intent. For example, after our forced displacement in October of 2023, next to a fire on our central square in occupied Stepanakert, together with Azerbaijani youngsters, Aliyev had the speech and said that after removal of Armenians physically from here, from Karabakh, now it's the time for the removal, eradication of their aura, Armenian aura from Karabakh. This is very clear genocidal intent. Or Aliyev for many times said that I am proud that the Azerbaijani young generation was brought up with hatred against enemy, and that's why we won this war. Or Aliyev, just in 2023, said that Armenia is the eternal enemy of Azerbaijan and Turkey, eternal enemy. And there are many other examples, for example, Trophy Park in Azerbaijan after 2020 aggression against Nagorno-Karabakh, and Trophy Park included and includes Armenian soldiers' mannequins with humiliated positions, etc. And the school children are attending this trophy park for their as part of their education. The other examples you can see, there are lots of reports. If you need, I can share with you. And with this background, there is no international, another reason, which is geopolitical reason, there is no international interest or great powers interest in order to ensure our return. Why? Because the Western countries, US and European Union, first they including Russia for sure, they aided and abetted this genocide, including blockade. If the US or and European Union leadership wanted, they could stop the blockade very strongly, but they didn't. But they supported the Azerbaijani narratives, and they played just a game showing, let's say, performing a game uh, showing that there is a negotiation, but negotiation between victim and the international crime perpetrator means that you are supporting the international crime perpetrator. The Western and Russian diplomats were pushing us to uh, to open the alternative route that Aliyev is suggesting. This route was meaning for us that someone is blocking your bread, someone is blocking your medicine, someone is every day humiliating you, and then says, "It's okay, I can give you the bread." It was very normal that our people didn't want to accept that bread. But European Union leader Michel publicly said that he supported that idea without pushing Aliyev to open Lachin corridor. Regardless of the fact that ICJ made two rulings during the blockade that Azerbaijan should lift the blockade. And there were three emergency meetings of the UN Security Council during the blockade. During these meetings, both US and Russia very proactively and intensively blocked French initiatives in order to have a resolution. And there was no resolution. And Russian and American diplomats were saying to us that any kind of resolution would be counter-constructive to these negotiating efforts. And by now, US and European Union don't want us to return because they consider us and our existence in Nagorno-Karabakh firstly as an obstacle for Armenian-Azerbaijani relationship normalization or so-called peace talk. And secondly, they are considering us as a lever for Russian influence in South Caucasus. But they had that chance to use this as an opportunity. I mean, our existence in our homeland as an opportunity to protect people living in their indigenous land, their native land, and using the same method, whatever Sossi described, like they used in Kosovo, and showing that justice is possible in international law or international relations. And Russia also is not interested in that because Russia doesn't have that power now. Otherwise, Russia didn't allow the blockade or the aggression. Besides, Russia has stronger interests and connections with Azerbaijan and Turkey in other places of South Caucasus, in Ukraine, in Syria, elsewhere, and connected with energy. And that's why there is no Russian pushing over Azerbaijan to allow our return. But again, as concluding point, after this all, anyone, whoever pushes us to go to Azerbaijani control, it means that they are supporting the Azerbaijani genocidal policy. It's like pushing Jewish people to the Nazi regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Artsakh. We really appreciate you coming in and speaking, and you've raised some really interesting points that I'm sure everyone here today will continue to be thinking about. As we started a bit late, we have now already hit our hour. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone does have questions, feel free to either put them in quickly, or you can send them to us afterwards, and we'll get them out to to the speakers, and hopefully we can arrange to have another conversation like this in the new year. Yes, Sophie, I see your hand raised.
I would like to add one nuance to what Artsakh said about the destruction of cultural heritage. Azerbaijan doesn't just destruct the cultural heritage, but it is appropriating Armenian cultural heritage, claiming that Armenian monasteries in Nagorno-Karabakh are anything but Armenian. They were first saying they are monasteries of Udis, then Russians, but the common narrative is Albanization, which is not Albanians in Albania and Kosovo, but there have been Caucasian Albanians, and this is a very strategic policy of historical revisionism, trying to claim that Armenians were not indigenous in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, but Azerbaijan is going much beyond that, saying that Armenians are not indigenous even in Armenia and in the region, and they have reached this mastery of historical revisionism, coming up with completely distorted history and his distorted, fabricated historical narratives. And this is becoming sometimes very absurd. And in the beginning, we were even laughing, but now we have started taking it seriously, because it's so strategically planned that after some time of repeating the same completely false narrative, people who don't know the history well start to taking those narratives as a reality. So this is very worrying, and it's a bit funny, but after Trump was elected a US president, I noticed a new trend in Azerbaijan's narratives, that they are even trying to portray themselves as almost the first Christian nation. And you know that Armenia has been historically considered the first state that has proclaimed Christianity at the same level. And until Trump was elected, Azerbaijan was claiming that all those Europeans or Americans are supporting Armenians because they are Islamophobes and because of this outdated anti-liberal Christianity notion. And now they are changing their narratives and going to Vatican and having visits from Vatican and opening some sites, claiming that there were old Christian monasteries in Azerbaijan. So this is becoming a little bit absurd, but this is exactly how modern cognitive information warfare works. And it is becoming a tool in ethnic conflicts. And I think this is something to take very seriously by researchers.
Thanks for that point.
Thanks a lot. Very shortly, it is very important, whatever Sosi described, because it's a part of their genocidal policy. Two examples, just to add Sosi's point. Firstly, there is a decree, presidential decree in Azerbaijan, that no Armenian name of the communities, or how to say, toponyms should not be used. And if you see the Azerbaijani state agencies' statements, defense ministry, foreign ministry, whatever it is, they are using only Azerbaijani names, false names, of all Armenian names, not only in Nagorno-Karabakh, but in Armenia. Even about Yerevan, Yerevan is capital city, they are calling Yerevan, and it's the Azerbaijani name. About all the regions and other names, whether it's borderline village or town, or it's not borderline, they are using only Azerbaijani name, only. Even by Aliyev, you can see different statements and interviews where he used the Azerbaijani names, false names, of Armenian republics, towns, and villages. The second example is whatever Sosi is describing about Albanization tendency, trend. In 2022, I guess it was beginning of February of 2022, when Aliyev visited one of the occupied villages of Nagorno-Karabakh, occupied in 2020. It was one of the Hadrut villages. Next to a church, there is a recording, video recording. He said that all of those Armenian manuscripts on the church stones are false, and Armenians wrote those manuscripts just recently. But this church is from 13th century, and there are historic witnesses, I mean written witnesses by Armenians and foreigners, historians, saying that this church was built by Armenians. There are some manuscripts Armenian on these walls, etc. And Aliyev is saying, just ordering to his, I don't know, whatever servants, that you should remove these manuscripts because they are false. This is Albanian, which means this is Azerbaijani church.
Thank you, Artsakh. If our speakers have another couple of minutes, we've had a question asking if anyone can comment on the current status of the refugees, in particular their living conditions. Is that something that any of us can comment on quickly?
I can, but it's a hard story. Actually, over 20,000 of refugees within this 1 year left Armenia. Mostly, even I would say almost everyone, because of humanitarian problems, because they couldn't find a job, their income, etc. And they mostly they left for Russia. And there are hundreds of others who could find some channels to left for Europe and US. For sure, everyone would like to go to Europe for the social support in Europe, but in Russia it's easy. It's visa-free regime in Russia. Besides, there is no language problem. People can speak Russian, and third, in Russia there are lots of Armenians and lots of Karabakh, Artsakh Armenians living together and supporting each other, etc. And social ties are very decisive in such kind of decisions. In Armenia, we are not living collectively. and the government's policy is to disseminate all of us, and maybe it's not it's not the best word, but assimilate, because they want to uh, they want to lose our identity and our collective rights in order to stop our demands for our return one day, and to close the door of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with this way. But the Armenian government gives us social support somewhat, but Armenia itself is a poor country. There is some small support by international community to the Armenian government, but only, I would say, a few tens of millions of dollars Armenia got. But our needs are billions of dollars of needs, and Armenia is taking debt, increasing the debt in order to address somewhat our needs. But again, whatever they are supplying to our people, it's addressing only maybe 20% of our needs. The rest is very problematic, and people should solve their problems. And now I would say, based on some expert calculations, assessment, between 70 to 80% of the Artsakh refugees in Armenia are in poverty, while over 25% of the Armenian society, Armenian citizens, are in poverty. You can see the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Artsakh, for that really considered response. We've had one final question. If our speakers have time for it, I'll let you go, as I know that it's quite late in a lot of times. Asked about the prospects for international accountability for the war crimes committed. Do our speakers feel that there are prospects at this point for international accountability?
Shortly, no. There is no political will anywhere, including in Armenia. And if we talk with decision makers of foreign governments, just I can bring that example, they are referring to the Armenian government's position. And they are saying that there is a peace talk. We are hopeful that peace will come. After that, we can discuss the rest, etc. Armenian government and Armenian authorities also are living in that illusion. And Aliyev regime is very professionally manipulating this topic, peace agreement or peace talks, in order to jeopardize all kind of possible accountability measures, whether individual or state accountability, sanctions, or I don't know, prosecution, etc. And Armenian government doesn't want to apply to ICC with state referral, and doesn't ask any kind of other colleagues or I don't know, partner countries in order to make a state referral. And that's why also the prosecution, ICC prosecution, doesn't feel any kind of push in order to prioritize this topic. But I, together with current ombudsman of Artsakh, we applied as victims, made communication to ICC. There are some organizations who applied or are going to apply. I mean, human rights organizations, Armenian and international. I think this is something that we can work together, but unless there is a state referral and any, I don't know, serious advocacy I don't believe that ICC would start investigation. But the day will come. I hope that by the death of Aliyev, that day will come and we will see Aliyev in the jail.
Thank you, Artsakh. I appreciate your thoughts. Sosie, did you want to chime in on that question as well?
Yeah, I can add something. I think that I'm not a lawyer as such, okay, but based on my knowledge of international law, I very much prioritize ICJ claim. I think it's very important to keep it, and I'm sure that Armenia has a huge chance to win. And I think that this claim is important not just for Nagorno-Karabakh, but for Armenia itself as a state. Because Azerbaijan is obviously conducting this lawfare against Armenia, completely manipulating even international law. And ICJ claim is a very good opportunity for Armenians collectively, meaning Armenia as a state and Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, to show how false are Azerbaijani narratives. As for ICC, I'm not an expert, but my understanding has been that because Azerbaijan hasn't signed the Rome Statute and is not a member of ICC, and because it's mostly applicable to sovereign Armenian territory, in terms of like war crimes that Azerbaijan committed in September 2022 when it conducted a two-day military offensive in Armenia, and even military women serving in Armenian armed forces were actually assaulted and degraded. There are videos, and they were circulated by Azerbaijanis through Telegram channels. My understanding was that Armenian ratification of Rome Statute and adherence to ICC was more aimed to strengthen the legal defense of Armenia as a sovereign state. But my understanding is also that ICC, unlike ICJ, has another mechanism that Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh or even NGOs can apply. So it should be necessarily an interstate mechanism. But what I'm seeing is that Azerbaijan is so aggressive in its information warfare and lawfare that it really kind of affects international community's opinion. And unfortunately, in the academic, in the political circles at executive level, the governments of major players don't use the term ethnic cleansing, and they are even afraid to emphasize that the displacement of Armenians was forced. In academic levels, you know, academics are very cautious with the terms like genocide. It's in academic community, they are cautious, and I myself very cautious with this term. I actually don't use the term genocide myself. I use the term ethnic cleansing, which, as you know, is not in the Rome Statute. However, it is considered a crime against humanity. So I think that it's obvious that what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is a crime against humanity, and one day perhaps there should be accountability for that.
Very shortly, I agree that ICJ case is very important. It's the most strategic case. Actually, it's not accountability case, but it's targeting the, as I said, ideological ground of all kind of crimes, the anti-Armenian hatred in Azerbaijan, the policy itself. Because without eradicating this anti-Armenian hatred policy or racial discrimination, it's impossible to have peace in South Caucasus. And it's for sure very important for all Armenians. Secondly, the Rohingya people's case is very similar to our case, and the forced displacement or deportation of our people is under ICC jurisdiction, because a part of crime was perpetrated out of ICC jurisdiction, out of sovereign territory of Armenia. But since we were forcibly displaced to Armenia, it is continuous crime, and that's why now it's under ICC jurisdiction. And all lawyers, I mean, who are in this field, international criminal lawyers, say that it's fully under ICC jurisdiction, the forced displacement itself.
For your thoughts and for that discussion. I think it's really interesting. Well, we've definitely hit our time. So to our three speakers, to Shishanik, to Soshi, and to Artsakh, who have really shared some incredibly interesting, very thoughtful commentary with us on what has happened historically and over the past year in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. I think it's been a really fruitful discussion, and I hope that next year we can continue this conversation. So thank you for your time. Thank you to those who tuned in, those who left us questions as well. I wish you all a very happy festive, and I hope that everyone gets some rest and that we can continue this fight in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.